The woman was
Wake
dying.
up, you will be
That was the
fine.
first thing Daniel recognized when he found her collapsed on the edge of his property, 3 miles from the main house. She lay in the dust like something the desert had already rejected, her dress hanging from her skeletal frame, her skin burned dark by the sun. She couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds, and those pounds seemed to be mostly bone and desperation. Daniel was 52 years old, had spent his entire adult life alone on his ranch in the mountains of Colorado, and he'd made peace with the idea that his life would be solitary until death. He had cattle, he had land, he had the kind of self-sufficiency that came from decades of refusing to need anyone. But he couldn't leave her here to die. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how little she weighed, how fragile her body felt in his hands. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow, her skin burning with fever. He carried her to his horse and rode back to the ranch house, the massive structure that had only ever sheltered one person, now suddenly containing responsibility he'd never anticipated. For 3 days, he thought she would die. Daniel had learned basic medicine from years on the frontier, how to set bones, how to treat infections, how to recognize when a body was simply giving up. This woman's body seemed determined to surrender. He spooned broth into her mouth, changed the compresses on her forehead, and waited for either improvement or the mercy of death. On the 4th day, she opened her eyes. They were the color of winter, gray-blue, intelligent, filled with confusion and fear. She tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged, her voice destroyed by thirst or screaming or both. "Don't try to talk," Daniel said, offering her water. "You're safe. You're in my house. My name is Daniel Garrett. You collapsed on my land. I brought you here." The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she turned her face away, as if she couldn't bear the kindness, as if safety itself was something too painful to endure. Her name was Eleanor, and her story emerged in pieces over the following weeks as her body slowly began to accumulate enough nutrition to remember how to survive. She'd been married to a man named Thomas, a man she met in Denver who'd promised her adventure in the frontier. Instead, he'd brought her to a remote cabin in the mountains and had begun a systematic process of isolation and control. He'd restricted her food, claiming poverty. He'd beaten her when she asked questions. He'd told her that no one would help her because no one knew she existed. When his abuse had escalated to the point that Eleanor believed he would eventually kill her, she'd run. She'd taken nothing. He'd watched her too carefully for that, and she fled into the mountains, hoping to reach civilization. But the mountains were vast and unforgiving, and she'd become lost, and her body had simply begun to shut down. "He'll come looking for me," Eleanor whispered, her voice still barely audible. "He won't let me go. He said I was his property. He said—" She broke off, unable to continue. "He won't find you here," Daniel said with absolute certainty. "And if he does, he won't leave alive. You're safe, Eleanor. You're going to heal and you're going to be safe." She looked at him then, and he saw something in her expression transform. The beginning of belief, the fragile emergence of hope. Eleanor's recovery was slow and painful. Her body had to relearn how to process food. Her mind had to relearn how to trust. Daniel provided both with patience that seemed infinite. He didn't push her to talk about her trauma. He didn't ask for gratitude. He simply created an environment of absolute safety and waited for her to remember how to be human. Slowly, her body began to change. The sharp bones beneath her skin softened with muscle and fat. Color returned to her cheeks. She gained enough strength to sit up, to walk to the window, eventually to move around the house, helping with small tasks. But the real transformation was internal. As Eleanor's body healed, her personality began to emerge. She was intelligent, capable, funny in a way that suggested she'd once had joy before trauma had attempted to steal it. She read the books from Daniel's shelves voraciously. She asked questions about ranching, about the frontier, about the kind of life a woman could build independently. "You could have your own property," Daniel said one afternoon, watching her organize his kitchen with efficient precision. "Once you're fully recovered. If you wanted to, you're capable of managing a ranch." Eleanor looked at him with an expression that suggested he'd offered her the world. "You really believe that?" "I know it," Daniel said. "I've watched you these past months. You're one of the strongest people I've ever known." It happened on a morning in late spring. nearly 6 months after he'd found her on the edge of his property. Daniel was working in the barn when Eleanor appeared, fully recovered now, moving with grace and strength. She was no longer the skeleton he'd carried inside, but a beautiful woman with confidence in her bearing and clarity in her eyes. "I want to stay," she said without preamble. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Daniel replied, assuming she meant until she felt ready to leave. "No," Eleanor said. "I want to stay permanently. I want to build a life here. With you." She paused. "I know what this looks like. A woman grateful to a man who saved her life. But that's not what this is. Daniel, I've had 6 months to think about who I am without Thomas, without fear dictating every decision. And I've discovered that I'm someone who loves you, not because you rescued me, but because you see me. You've never tried to possess me or control me. You've simply seen me." Daniel felt something break open in his chest, something that had been sealed for 52 years. "Eleanor, let me finish," she said. "I know you're a solitary man. I know you built your life around not needing anyone. But I'm not asking you to change that. I'm asking you to let me be part of it, to build something together that honors both of us." Daniel crossed the barn and took her hands. "I love you," he said. "I've loved you since the moment I realized you were going to survive. I was terrified to tell you because I didn't want you to think your feelings were obligated, didn't want you to feel trapped by gratitude." "I'm not trapped," Eleanor said. "For the first time in my life, I'm free, and I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." They married 2 weeks later in the small town near the ranch, with the preacher and the town doctor as witnesses. Eleanor wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Daniel had brought her. Cream-colored, simple, elegant. When she spoke her vows, her voice was strong and clear, a woman claiming her own future. "I promise to build a life with you," she said. "Not as your possession, but as your partner. I promise to be honest, to be myself, to never accept anything less than mutual respect. I promise to honor the man who saved my life by becoming the woman I'm capable of being." 1 year into their marriage, Eleanor had her own building on the property, a small house she designed and worked to build herself, with Daniel's help but on her terms. She used it as a school, teaching the children of neighboring ranchers to read, to think critically, to question the world around them. It became known throughout the territory as a place where young minds were encouraged to expand, where education wasn't seen as dangerous but as liberating. 2 years into their marriage, Eleanor was pregnant, and the joy of it was visible in everything she did. Daniel would watch her move through the house, her hand on her swollen belly, and he would remember the skeleton she'd been, the woman he'd thought was dying. "Thank you," she said to him one evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "For what?" "For not trying to keep me small," Eleanor said. "For finding me on the edge of death and not deciding that meant I owed you my life. For loving me in a way that made me want to become more, not less." Daniel pulled her close. "Thank you for choosing to stay, for choosing me." The confrontation came the spring of their 3rd year, and it was brief. Thomas appeared at the ranch with 2 hired guns, claiming Eleanor as his property, demanding her return. Daniel faced him without hesitation, his hand on his revolver. "She's not your property," Daniel said quietly. "She was never your property, and she's never going back with you." Thomas laughed. "You think you can stop me? I have." Daniel drew his revolver faster than Thomas could process the movement. The shot was clean, disabling rather than fatal. A warning, a statement, a promise. "Leave," Daniel said. "And if you ever come back, I'll kill you." "That's not a threat. That's a fact." Thomas and his hired guns left, and they were never heard from again. Eleanor had watched from the window, and when Daniel came inside, she took his hands. "I knew you wouldn't let him take me. But thank you for being willing to fight for me. For us." By their 5th anniversary, the ranch had become something unexpected. A sanctuary for women escaping abuse, a place where Eleanor trained them to be independent, to manage property, to understand that they had choices. Daniel supported this completely, helping them learn skills, providing resources, creating an environment where healing could happen. The woman who'd been skin and bones on the edge of his property had become the strongest person Daniel knew. And in loving her and respecting her autonomy while offering support, he discovered that solitude and partnership weren't opposites. They were simply different ways of existing, and partnership with the right person was infinitely richer. Eleanor had stolen his heart by simply being herself, strong, resilient, grateful without being subservient, willing to build something together while maintaining her own identity. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from the porch of their home, Eleanor said something she'd been thinking for years. "I was dying when you found me. Not just physically, my spirit was dying. You didn't just save my life, Daniel. You taught me that I was worth saving, that I was worth more than what one cruel man had told me I was worth. You gave me back myself." Daniel kissed her forehead. "You gave yourself back. I just provided the space for you to heal." "Maybe," Eleanor said, "but you also taught me what real love looks like. Not possession, not control, not even rescue. Just partnership, respect, the freedom to become everything I could be." The woman who'd been skin and bones had become a symbol throughout the territory, a testament to resilience, to the possibility of rebuilding, to the understanding that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about saving someone, but about standing beside them while they save themselves. And Daniel, the lonely rancher who'd spent 52 years in solitude, had discovered that loneliness was a choice, and partnership, real, honest, respectful partnership, was the greatest adventure Frontier had to offer. In a world that so often tried to diminish women, to keep them small and controlled, Eleanor and Daniel had created something revolutionary, a love based on equality, on genuine respect, on the understanding that a woman's strength made a man stronger, not weaker. She'd arrived as skin and bones, dying at the edge of his property. She'd left his life completely transformed, not because he'd changed her, but because he'd given her the safety to change herself. And in doing so, she'd stolen his heart completely.